This video is an overview of the Spearhead micro-armour figure gaming rules, written by Art Conliffe in 1995. I'm not covering modern Spearhead in this video, but may do so in the future. The objective is to allow potential players to determine if these rules are suitable for them by looking at the basic elements of any set of rules. From experience, I have found the most important aspect of any rules is its scale, as this affects a host of other factors. Scale affects what type of game you would expect, what amount of movement you would expect, and to a lesser extent, the force mixes you require to play a game. The next most important factor to consider is the game system, such as sequence of play, visibility, movement, and fire combat system. This will tell you how detailed or otherwise a set of rules is. The main aspect you would be looking at is its historical accuracy. Players may wish to dial up or dial down the historical accuracy of what they're currently playing. The game system will generally tell you what level of historical accuracy the rules possess, and then you can determine if this is a dial up or a dial down as per your original objective. And this step is where you start learning a set of rules and beginning to have test games, which is what I call discovering the gameplay. This quickly uncovers the playability of a set of rules. By understanding gameplay, you can determine how playable a set of rules is. You may dial up the historical accuracy and then discover the gameplay is so convoluted and complex that any benefit accuracy is lost. Thus, you may decide that you need to dial down historical accuracy and achieve a gameplay that is actually feasible. We quickly discover how complex a set of rules are. Complexity is about how easy it is to learn the rules. Having the best rules in the universe provides no benefit if the rules are so complex, so poorly written, and so difficult to learn that you simply can never play with them. Complexity is a combination of the way the rules are written and the actual complexity of the game system. Training material can mitigate many aspects of complexity. While this represents supporting material and could be included in that later section, example guides, training guides and videos can all make a set of rules much easier to play, thus negating many aspects of poor rule structure and rules complexity. It must be pointed out that a complex set of rules can have only a minimum effect on the effort and time to play a game, once someone is experienced. Complex rules normally fail because they are too hard to learn the rules in the first place and people simply give up. The final factor to consider is supporting material, which is required for players to create force mixes, set up a game and play the game. Many free rules may be very good, but they lack cheat sheets, equipment lists, army lists and scenarios, which require players to make an enormous amount of effort to simply get a game off the ground. While these rules may be nice, in the end the effort is just too great to play them and they normally die on the vine. As indicated at the beginning of the video, we'll be covering the 1995 version of Spearhead. Spearhead was published in 1995, and while not as professional as Rapid Fire, these rules proved to be the most popular at this scale. There is nothing innovative in the game system, and the space expended on rules for orders and fire priority does seem unusual, but it seems to hit all the right buttons. The rule structure and length is ideal as a reference book on the playing area. The use of equipment stat sheets greatly assist players, and the army lists in a separate book are extensive. Many clubs took up these rules, especially in New Zealand, and a great deal of supporting material was created. Most importantly, a point system was created, which allowed for competitive games. These rules are still played widely today, and new scenarios have been created and posted on the Yahoo or today IO Group sites up until this very day. Spearhead is a one element equals a platoon scale set of rules, which allows a player to command a brigade or regiment. A player should have no more than 50 elements, so at 4 platoons per company and 4 companies per battalion, this gives you 2 battalions with attached formation or 3 minimal battalions, which basically represents a brigade or a regiment. The ground scale in Spearhead is 1 inch equals 100 yards, which is 1 in 3600 scale. This applies to 6mm and 15mm figures. For 20mm figures, and also if you want to, you can use this for 15mm figures, all distances are multiplied by 1.5, which gives you a scale of 1 in 2400. For 6mm and 15mm figures, which is the 3600 scale, a playing area should be a maximum of 3600 metres and a minimum of 1200 metres, not including impassable flanks. This gives you a playing area which would be between 100 centimetres and 33 centimetres. Obviously you would err on the 100 centimetre side. The depth really depends on the scenario being played. The width is based on standard frontages of infantry battalions, as it's assumed the defender will have from 2 to 3 battalions, more likely 2 battalions with reserves. A width of 3 feet or 90 centimetres is reasonable in this case. This assumes any scenario being played will complete within a day. Larger games are possible if you decide for multi-day games, and as a result you can have playing areas much larger than what I've just stipulated here. For 20mm and the larger 15mm scale, 2400 scale, increase all playing area sizes by 50%. Each game turn represents from 15 minutes to 30 minutes, on average about 20 minutes. Assuming the longer scale and a maximum game length of 12 game turns, we can represent typically 4 hours or a maximum of 6 hours of real time. As troops are dramatically slowed down when in action for more than 4 to 6 hours, this is a nice time frame which allows us to represent a typical breakthrough operation. At a 2-to-1 attack, you can advance up to 1500 metres against opposition in this time frame, which gives us an advance distance of about 45 centimetres against opposition. For 6mm figures, which uses a scale of 3600, a depth of 120 centimetres or 4 feet is recommended, as it gives each side a 30 centimetre player zone and allows for advances up to 60 centimetres. A meeting engagement would not need this depth. Perhaps 3 feet depth maximum is all you require in this case, although, as I keep on reiterating, meeting engagements tend to be reasonably boring scenarios. The sequence of play is reasonably standard for the period, with the only unusual aspect the complex direct fire subphases. The rules attempt to reflect the effects of moving in the sequence of play, which is both very good and not so good. It's good because it avoids rules, which is always a great thing. It's bad because you need to move across the front line many times, which makes it hard to get a grasp of any local action. For example, if your front line is 4 feet, then you basically got to run from one end to the other and doing stationary infantry fire, then come back again and do anti-tank gunfire, etc., etc. If the engagement is small enough, it's not a particular issue, but once you start getting a bit large and complex, it means you lose track of what you're attempting on the left flank when you hit the right flank and come back to the left flank. Nonetheless, it seems to work reasonably well because most actions tend to be fairly focused on an individual flank. The visibility rules is very basic, with standard visibility ranges based on 2 element types and 2 cover types, and of course if the element has fired. This is nice and simple and it works quite well, although there is potential issues if you want to do things like fight at night, fight in bad visibility, etc., etc. Nonetheless, I would suggest most games all occur in clear weather in daylight, so for the 90% of scenarios where this occurs, these rules, visibility rules, are perfect. There are a lot of rules associated with orders in Spearhead. All formations need initial orders, or alternatively up to 1/3 of formations can be uncommitted and in reserve. Reserve formations do not have initial orders, but can be given orders during the game and once given operate in the same way as formations with initial orders. Changing orders need a trigger and have a number of other restrictions. Once this can occur, there is a random factor to determine if the order change occurs or not. In terms of reserves, defender reserves must be off the playing area, but their entry point must be clearly indicated or written down. Attackers' reserves can advance up to 25% into the playing area from the friendly player edge. When giving orders, the restrictions associated with them are reasonably simple. An attack order requires an objective and a path and requires mandatory movement towards the objective along the path until engaged. Defend orders require you to hold a position. The special rules are flank orders, which at this scale work well. Finally, we have timed orders, which allow for complex activity, attack to this objective and change to defend, or if you fail to get there by going turn 6, change to defend regardless. Once again, the biggest issues with order restrictions have been dealt with rather well, but it must be pointed out there are a lot of rules associated with orders that need to be studied carefully. Experienced players will have no issues, but for new players a lot of issues could arise. It would be very easy to forget the restrictions, forget a whole range of things associated with orders, so a lot of effort needs to be allocated towards making sure that you're following the rules correctly. While I do not like order rules, these rules seem to work reasonably well, although I'm pretty certain the same benefits could be achieved without the use of orders, such as detailed points-based victory conditions. We need to understand what is really the purpose of orders. The purpose of orders is to get something happening. I mean, that's the main purpose. There are other factors, like for example, people making orders and then when you suddenly uncover them, oops, I've made the wrong order in response to your order, like a paper, scissors, etc. That aspect isn't so enjoyable, but I must admit that these order rules do force the attackers to move towards some objective, irrespective of what they come across. However, the real aspect of these order rules which I find good is the reserve concept. Because of the scale of the rules, the most you can play is 4 real hours. This would, as a result, only include the actual breakthrough action. As a result, the order rules work very well within this time frame. In summary, considering the scale used and the fact I don't like orders generally, these order rules work well and are optimum for these rules. The initiative rules are reasonably standard. Both players determine initiative and the winner selects the movement order, either first or last. The movement rules are reasonably standard as well. Each element has a movement allowance ranging from 6 inches for infantry or foot, 9 inches for tanks and 12 inches for motor vehicles or other very fast things. Movement along road gives you a bonus of 3 inches to 6 inches. Terrain has an effect on movement based on elements which are tracked, half-tracked wheel, towed or foot. When elements are engaged and wish to conduct direct fire, their movement is also reduced, obviously because they're concerned about direct fire. Pretty standard stuff, although vehicle movement seems rather low compared with foot movement. It all seems to work reasonably well. Aircraft is covered in a simple manner, with only one side normally containing aircraft, and only ground support aircraft included. It's natural to attempt to minimise aircraft complexity, so I understand why this is the case, but I tend to like a more interesting aircraft system. When attacking, the rules are similar to a range of squad scale rules, where aircraft attack an area or beaten zone and all elements in that area are affected. Calling in aircraft is dealt with well. The AOC, or Aircraft Forward Commander, or whatever you want to refer to it, acquires a target and calls in ground support, which is then tested for. The attack occurs in the same game turn and can continue as long as the tests allow and the enemy element remains a valid target. I must admit I'm a bit uncertain of when the attack actually occurs, so it could be in the following game turn rather than the current. And the aircraft fire occurs in the same phase as the aircraft attack. Flak can destroy the aircraft or cause it to abort and attack the following turn. While from a game mechanic point of view this works well, I'm uncertain if it takes an aircraft from 15 to 30 minutes to circle around and attack again. But apart from this, the actual effect does work reasonably well. In addition to this, flak can also affect the actual aircraft attack, so is reasonably effective. Artillery, or more accurately indirect fire, because it also includes mortars, occurs during the artillery phase. This would include area and fire support missions, but mainly is fire support. Area fire, which is typically pre-planned, occurs as most rules. You nominate the target and the game turn. Fire support must be called in by observers or FOs. Artillery can also conduct self-observed fire. Artillery is either divisional or regimental, and its responsiveness is affected by this classification. FOs, which can be nominated fighting platoons, calls in artillery fire in the artillery phase. These are normally only for regimental level artillery. For divisional artillery, you require special divisional FOs. but otherwise they operate the same as standard FOs. When calling in artillery or indirect fire, you need to make a test, similar to calling in an aircraft. Note whether or not it's regimental or divisional. As you can see here, different nationalities have different probabilities of bringing in artillery fire, and also if it's regimental or divisional, the chance varies quite a bit. In conclusion, indirect fire is covered rather well considering the scale. There are a number of rules controlling target priority when calling in fire, which is a common thread in Spearhead. This makes me think it's being done to stop gaming of the system, which is common when using this type of sequence of play. When we look at direct fire, the ranges are all printed on the cheat sheets and range from 3 inches to 18 inches depending on the weapon. This works well within the observation rule restrictions. Direct fire results are calculated in a very simple manner, and the modifiers are quite simple with a very short list of modifiers. The most important modifier is comparing the anti-tank attack capacity or fire effectiveness against the armour or defensive effectiveness value of the target. So a attack or FE value of 6 against a defence value of 3 results in a +3 modifier, which gives you a big advantage. The one interesting rule is there are no range effects, thus as long as the target is within range, the effect is the same. This makes for a simple system which does have its merits. Of course, purists will find this annoying. The fire combat results are very simple, with only an eliminated and suppression result available. Once a target is suppressed, it's frozen, and a second suppression will result in its elimination. A result of elimination is self-explanatory. Suppressed elements can rally, which removes the effect of suppression. This system could explain why there are a lot of rules restricting the targets which can be fired against. Once suppressed, the temptation to load fire on that element in order to eliminate it is very strong, especially with weaker anti-tank or weaker attack forces. The combat system is simple and elegant, although so simplified some players may feel it lacks flavour. If we look at gameplay, specifically the rules are a strong point. They are short and condensed. The format is good, and while I still think you need an examples document to help players learn the rules are perfect for gameplay. If we look at special rules, which always tend to have a big negative effect in sets of rules, there are a number of special rules, specifically around orders, fire order, and a few other minor areas. But generally the special rules are kept to a minimum. The order rules may be the easiest to forget during the game, and thus you may make an error, but the other special rules tend to occur in a manner it's hard to forget and make errors in terms of applying them. Another gameplay negative is strength points, markers, counters, and all this sort of stuff. Well, Spearhead definitely has a big advantage here. There is no strength point markers, and the number of other markers or counters are kept to a real minimum. In this case, this is a real strength of the rules. The sequence of play is actually quite simple. There's only one area of complexity, which I've mentioned before, the lots of sub-phases around fire order. While I still class the sequence of play as very good, this additional complexity is annoying, as if you fight across a 2-metre playing area and there are related combats occurring at opposite end, you need to keep track of what is occurring at one end as you flip to the other flank and come back again. You can lose track of things. It's not a major issue, as most games do not result in this kind of wide flank type combat situation occurring very often. Normally only one flank is being hit, in which case there's no issue at all. But in larger games, it could be a real problem. Calculation complexity, which can be an issue in many sets of rules, is certainly not an issue with Spearhead. About the most complexity you need to consider is subtracting defence from your attack values. Let's now look at supporting lists or supporting material, which can be a real negative with some sets of rules. There is a separate document which contains what I consider a very good army list. It's simple and basic, but the rules aren't really that focused on historical detail. So the generalised army lists are very, very good. The only issue is there are some gaps in the army list, Polish, etc., etc. So because of this, I class it at average simply because it stops you from easily playing certain periods. But there's certainly more than enough army lists to give you lots of games without much research required. The other data that you normally require is equipment lists. There are separate cheat sheets containing the most equipment you would use. The cheat sheets are brilliant and I think it is a real strength in terms of the rules. The only issue is that there are huge gaps. So once again, this is a negative. So I class this as average but adequate. Some wargaming clubs have attempted to fill some of the gaps, such as increase other weapon systems and other nationalities, etc. So you can actually get a lot of information from the various free sites or wargame sites. So it's certainly not a major negative, but something that you may want to consider to put some effort in if you want to fight something unusual, such as the Russians versus the Japanese in 1939. Apart from some very basic scenarios contained in the rules, there's not much material in this area. However, in defence of the rules, the order system simulates many aspects of a scenario, so creating a scenario would be very simple. The only issue is a lack of a point system which requires you to playtest all your scenarios to ensure it's balanced. I know point systems may not be 100% correct, but if you have a good, solid, robust point system, at least you can quickly whip up a scenario and you can actually flip nationalities. So you can create one scenario that may apply to basically lots of different nationalities and lots of different periods. Saying all this, there are a large number of scenarios created by players across the world which are posted on the various sites. So a lot of the negatives have been reduced in this area. My only complaint really is the lack of a competition style scenario and point system. Part of this was created by a wargaming club in New Zealand, but if there was any aspect I would like to see more work put into is for this to be complete. On the other hand, many players don't really care about competition style plays, so it's not going to be a major negative for most people. The ground scale and game turn scale dramatically affects any set of rules, and Spearhead is no exception. The rules have been skillfully optimised to cater to the ground and game turn scale that it has selected. If you like those scales, this is possibly the best set of rules you'll ever use. If you do not like those these scales, it will prove disappointing. However, this applies to any set of rules, so it's certainly not a negative concerning Spearhead. In summary, these are a good set of rules and they possess no major issue which could kill your enjoyment of the rules. I've played many rules which end up being a joyless effort. These certainly do not fit into that category and are complete enough for you to quickly whip up a game without masses of research and effort. There is one caveat I wanted to raise. When playing a game, there are a number of factors you need to be aware of, especially when setting up terrain. At a scale of 1 to 3600, these rules fit in between a typical squad scale of 1 to 1000 and a platoon scale which reflects the strength of the elements of 1 in 5000. As each tank element represents 5 vehicles, a more logical scale would be 1 to 5000 rather than 1 to 3600. This is certainly not an issue, but you need to be aware of this because you do get a couple of the squad scale issues arising with these rules that you may not with a set of rules that use a scale of 1 in 5000. The main issue is the classic single centrally placed weapon which covers the entire front line. A pack 40 on a hill in the centre of the playing area could in theory cover 18 inches to the left and 18 inches to the right. This could cover the entire front line, or most of it, which reduces the ability to select flanks to attack and do a little bit more complex strategy, so to speak. The rules minimises this with its firing priority rules, but it does mean a flank attack needs to also ensure the centre attracts the attention of the pack 40. This is not an issue if you ensure the terrain is reasonably historically accurate. Most advances run along a road, which means it's very unlikely you would have a large hill in the centre of a playing area. The road builders would have gone around it, so placing hills on the flank area would be more accurate, or at least major hills. A prepared attack against a prepared defence can, of course, be against any terrain. So, this rule would not apply to that. But assuming we want a fluid game, we should be playing a mobile advance against an ad hoc defensive line, which could be prepared and the troops dug in, certainly, but still needs to block the enemy path of advance, which would normally represent a road and reasonably flat terrain. Of course, within this central road area, built-up areas can be placed, and this would actually be expected. You could even have streams running across, and you could even have light woods. But we need to avoid having a nice big hill which a Pak-40 could dominate the whole front line from. The second point is you need to ensure you have historically accurate terrain densities. It's often stated that on the Western Front the typical engagement range between tanks is about 500 metres and on the Eastern Front closer to 1,000 metres. If we assume 1,000 metres for the Eastern Front, which is less than 12 inches, and 9 inches for the Western Front, we need to ensure terrain is placed in such a manner which, encourages this. The desert is of course an exception, but in Europe you need a reasonable amount of small hills, woods and built-up areas scattered around to ensure that your Pak-40 doesn't have a full 18 inches of range right across the entire front line. The result, when we do this correctly, is the Pak-40 can cover the centre, but the Germans still need to deploy forces on each flank to meet attacks there. Another way of resolving this is to reduce troop densities by increasing the playing area size. So if your infantry regiment is covering 5,000 metres or more, then you don't get this central dominating effect occurring. This also works quite well and seems to be the main solution that most Spearhead players typically use. I actually consider Spearhead reasonably unique. Other rules are more detailed and as a result more difficult to play, or are too complex to learn easily, or are too difficult to play in an enjoyable manner, or actually almost nothing occurs during a game. Others also fall down in terms of supporting material. The most common set of rules brought up as a comparison to Spearhead is Fistful of Toe 3s, which I like, but are really chalk and cheese compared to Spearhead. FFT3 is far more complex and detailed and historically accurate, but when you play a game, not really very much can occur sometimes. As a result, it's more suited to a multi-day game. Combat HQ is probably the closest to Spearhead, but it does lack the completeness of Spearhead, although that is being resolved. Rules such as Blitzkrieg Commander and Kampfgruppen use a very different game turn scale, so it's very hard to compare. As a result, these rules are reasonably unique in terms of, practical rules. There are many set of freeware rules available which could be similar, but the lack of updating and supporting materials for these rules mean they're not really very practical. This concludes part 22 of my video series on game and design theory, in this case a specific analysis of the Spearhead micro-armour figure gaming rules. Denken Sie daran, immer vorher Heimatland zu kämpfen. The official website for Spearhead is, if you haven't already guessed it, spearhead.wargames.info. Contains a lot of supporting material for the rules. There is a reasonable review and additional resources also on the WordPress site. As for purchasing a copy of the rules, you can purchase a copy for Amazon or Noble Knight or a number of other sources. I purchased my copy in the UK, I think it was Calver Books, but you should be able to obtain a copy reasonably easily. There are a number of very active communities based around IU Group. I highly recommend anyone wishing to learn the rules to join this group, as the players in the groups are always willing to provide assistance or answer rules questions. There are also a number of supporting files on the site, such as scenario, cheat sheets and a host of other supporting material.